There's a ton of changes coming to the fighter next patch, so let's talk about it. My first impressions are I really feel like they've been watching my videos because they are changing a lot of things in the exact way I would do it. They are adding utility to Wallop. They are giving us a more consistent snare. They are changing up the stances to make that gameplay more interesting. And I want to say this is absolutely a buff to the fighter in isolation. In isolation, the fighter is absolutely getting better next patch. However, there are other factors that are going to contribute to how the fighter feels that are becoming more and more prevalent as the weeks go on, and this upcoming test phase, it's going to get really crazy as people get level 20 crafted weapons. Right now, there are mages in my guild that have 500 plus magical power unbuffed. If you have ever faced a mage with 500 plus magical power, it is complete clownery, 2-3 shots, common. That's just how it goes. And more players are getting access to this gear, as well as we have level 20 crafted weapons coming online here relatively soon. The game is a complete clown show in terms of time to kill, and that just makes the inherent advantage of range better. So despite fighter getting these giga buffs, ranged is going to get so much more powerful as the weeks go on, just due to the mechanics of the game. The best analogy I can use is that fighters are like samurai swords. If you buff samurai swords by 200% in the year 1200, that is a huge buff. But right now, we just buffed samurai swords by 200% in the year 2025, and mages are AC 130s, quite literally. Lightning Bolt is their 105mm. Then their fireballs are the 40mm cannons, and Conflagrate is the machine gun, which you really don't even need. And I don't just want to single out mages because it's not really a mage issue. It is an issue with the stats overall. Fighters can absolutely hit insanely hard as well, but their kit requires them to actually get in close, put themselves in a compromising position to do the damage. It has a little bit more setup, whereas mage is very much just like bam, bam, bam. And the mage toolkit right now is very good in this current TTK environment, but even as a fighter, here's a guy in my guild named Slurpee who has, I believe, around 360 main stat, doing four-shotting a guy with his bow as a fighter. So the damage is crazy overall. It's just that some toolkits are thriving more in this environment than fighter. But overall, I do really enjoy these changes. These are absolutely buffs, and when the time to kill does get fixed, fighters may genuinely be a powerhouse class. I'm very excited to play this toolkit in an environment that is not as much of a clown world as it is. So let's go over some of the most important and most impactful changes first. So the biggest thing that's changing is that Crippling Blow no longer trips staggered targets. That is now moving over to Wallop. Crippling Blow is now exclusively a snare, and it is a good snare because it applies 2 stacks of snare right off the bat. That's pretty crazy. And Wallop is now your new Crippling Blow, which will trip staggered targets. The next big change is that Battle Cry is now going to be a CC breaking ability, which is really, really nice. We'll get to that later. It's unclear if Berserk is still going to retain its crowd control breaking ability, but I believe it will still retain its crowd control immunity effect, but we'll have to just see and find out. And the final change is a pretty big one coming to Form of Fluidity, which is now going to be a damage mitigation stance. This is going to grant up to 15% additional physical and magical evasion based off of momentum. So there are some keywords here you need to look at. Up to 15%. That is the maximum based off of momentum. So momentum we'll get to later in this video, but we're going to have a lot less of it effectively, and it's evasion. So these attacks will miss. They won't be reduced. They will miss entirely. So there's kind of an RNG element to this, and it's also retaining 25% disable evasion. So Form of Fluidity is going to be pretty good if we somehow have high momentum, but I don't feel like we're going to, and we'll get to that in a minute. But still an interesting change. I'm curious to see how this will play out. So those are the changes you need to keep in the back of your head as we discuss these buffs and nerfs. Let's start off with the buffs. And oh my goodness, there are a lot of them. The first buff we have coming is that we no longer have to spend any talent points on our stances or the passives associated with our stances. This basically means that we can just unlock the whole fighter tree and not have to make any choices. I'm sure this is temporary, but it seems like with all these free talent points we're getting next patch, we can just have everything. It already seems like we kind of have everything, but now next patch, we're going to have it all. So we get all this stuff for free, all of the forms for free, all of the passives associated with the forms for free. Effectively, this is just going to mean that fighters are going to be able to have both improved lunging strike and improved whirlwind, which I'm not complaining about. The next change is coming to leap strike, which is now going to apply a stagger rather than a snare at its base level. Now, I'm not entirely sure if this is going to be a buff because there's a lot of instances where you really want that snare instead of a stagger. However, we need to keep in mind that we have a much better snare next patch with crippling blow, so maybe this won't be an issue. However, it is super interesting that they are giving fighter more instances where we can apply stagger by ourselves. I think they're really trying to free us from the bondage of Form of Celerity. I'm not sure how well they're going to be able to do that, but yes, they are giving us more access to more abilities to stagger targets, and this is going to be pretty interesting. I definitely think this is a buff contextually. Next up, we have some pretty big buffs to Whirlwind. It looks like they are cleaning up Whirlwind to be a little bit less clunky. I hope they fix the Whirlwind instant cancel bug. That thing, that's super annoying. Honestly, Whirlwind wouldn't be bad right now if they could just fix that part. They're also increasing the damage from 30 to 45%, which is pretty big because I feel like the stacking mechanic is probably going to be better and more consistent. So this might be a huge buff to Whirlwind overall. But the most interesting thing is that Climactic Whirlwind, the uppercut at the end of Whirlwind, is now going to apply a stagger. We have another instance where we can apply a stagger without relying on Form of Celerity. This is going to be super interesting to see how this plays out, because right now in the current game, most fighters are just sitting Form of Celerity because we just really need that stagger. But I'm really curious to see if us getting staggers from other sources will free us up to maybe dance around to the other stances. We're just gonna have to see, because I'm not sold on it yet, but we will see. And now the fun begins. Now we're getting into the most impactful buffs coming to fighter. If you thought those buffs were good, just wait. We're getting to the good stuff now. Next up, we have Cataclysm is being reduced to a 30-second cooldown. 50% less cooldown on Cataclysm. This is big. Not in isolation, but this is big because of the new buff coming to Knockout. Knockout is now going to apply Shaken to your target. This is huge because this means the Knockout Cataclysm combo is even more deadly because your Cataclysm damage is going to be affected by the Shaken that your Knockout applies. So we're going to have some crazy Cataclysm damage coming next patch. We're going to be doing it more frequently. The Knockout and Cataclysm are going to sync up more often with those, with Knockout being a 15-second cooldown and Cataclysm being a 30-second cooldown. And the butter, to butter it up even more, the Shaken debuff stacks additively. So Knockout will apply a 6-second Shaken, and then Cataclysm will apply a 6-second Shaken. And that will stack up to 12 seconds. So you're going to have 12, probably more like 11 or 10 or 11 seconds of Shaken debuff out of a Cataclysm to just wombo combo somebody. So this is going to be really, really good. The next big buff is something we already talked about a little bit, and that is that Crippling Blow is going to be a dedicated snare ability. This is huge because they are buffing the power of it. It is now going to apply 2 instances of snare for a 50% reduction in speed, and Crippling Blow being a dedicated snare is really, really nice because right now it is tied to our trip, and there are a lot of instances where you want to snare somebody, but you don't want to waste the trip effect because they don't have a stagger or they're on trip DR or for whatever reason. So it's going to be really, really nice to have a snare that is as powerful as that, but also just we can hit the button and we can not feel like we're wasting our knockdown. So that's going to be really, really big. Next up, we have a huge change to our crowd control break, and that is with Battle Cry breaking crowd control. Now, even if we don't retain our Berserk crowd control break, this is a huge buff because right now in the game, there are a lot of instances as a fighter where you cannot use your crowd control break because you do not have 20 momentum, or you have to waste your Berserk to break a crowd control, and Berserk is also our biggest offensive button. It is our CC immunity. It really sucks to have to use Berserk as our CC break when it's so valuable in other contexts. So not having to waste our Berserk for a CC break is huge. This is going to improve our effective DPS pretty tremendously. It's going to make us more survivable because we're not going to get caught with no momentum. Also, Battle Cry is now going to apply Demoralize, which is a 10% damage dealt reduction in an AoE for 8 seconds. What we don't know is, are we still retaining the weakened and riled effect in Battle Cry? I don't know. I feel like we're probably losing that because they buffed Whirlwind's damage as well, unless they really want us having some Omega level Whirlwinds with weaken. I don't know. But even if we do lose that, I think that's okay. This CC break is huge. But wait, there's more. There's other implications with Battle Cry being its own ability, and that is that the cooldown can be reset and lowered by Berserk. So there is a hypothetical situation where you could Battle Cry to break a crowd control, Berserk for crowd control immunity, and then Battle Cry again to break another crowd control. That is something that absolutely could happen. However, I don't really envision this scenario really happening that often because we're going to be a lot more momentum starved next patch, which we'll talk about in a minute. But there are a lot of fighter CC breaks, CC immunities, CC resistances. So it'll be a little interesting to see how things pan out in practice. We'll just have to play it. Next up, we have a pretty crazy passive change coming to Wallop. Wallop is going to return 30% of our momentum spent as a heal over time over 6 seconds. This is pretty crazy because we're going to be using Wallop a lot, and this is just free sustainability. However, this is not nearly as crazy as it sounds. Fighters aren't going to be, lifesteal, live lord gods. That's not what's going to happen because it's not that much healing, but it's kind of free healing. So this is still really good. I don't want to poo-poo on this, but it's not as crazy as it sounds. So let's talk about the hypothetical max momentum Wallop, which is something that is not going to happen very often due to other factors, which we'll talk about in a minute. But this hypothetical max level Wallop is going to spend 40% of your momentum. 30% of 40 is 12. So that means that you're getting a 2% heal every second for 6 seconds. Now that's really good, but this is the hypothetical max momentum Wallop. This is something that's not going to happen because you're going to be spending your momentum on other skills and other Wallops and Berserk and Lunging Strike and all the other things you're doing. It's very rare to get to 100 momentum and do a Wallop. And even if you do, it's only 2% heal per second for 6 seconds. So it's not insane, but this is still really nice because you're going to be getting a lot of free healing with your little baby Wallops over and over and over again. This is going to have a lot of uptime. This is going to be good, but it's not going to be crazy. Now, what is going to be crazy is the change coming to Rupture. Rupture is going to be able to stack consecutively and stack with multiple fighters. This is a crazy change. Right now, I am a huge believer in Rupture in the current game because it can hit really hard when you have max wound stacks, and you can set yourself up for a crazy burst combo with the Rupture having delayed damage. Having this be able to stack and hit twice next patch and having the wounds be able to feed off of each other, and oh my god, this is going to be a crazy change. Oh my god, I can't describe to you how crazy you're going to be able to clip some people with a double Rupture into Maim, into lethal blow. It's going to be crazy what you can do with this. So this change is just straight up gas. And finally, the biggest buff coming to Fighter next patch is something that I guarantee you didn't think about because I haven't heard anyone else talk about this except me, and that is the change from our trip being tied to crippling blow to Wallop. What are the implications of this? So in my opinion, the number one value that fighters bring is that we have a low cooldown trip. Right now, we can trip people with crippling blow every 10 seconds. That's crazy, right? Well, guess what? Crippling blow has a 10-second cooldown. Wallop has an 8-second cooldown. This is crazy. We are going to have a ton of trip uptime if Wallop still retains its 8-second cooldown. Nothing has indicated to me that this is not still the case, that it has an 8-second cooldown. This is crazy. We're going to have even more knockdowns. Yes, there's DR, but having a higher uptime on the most powerful part of our kit is going to be a big deal. And you might not think that 20% more uptime on that is huge, but there are so many instances as a fighter where, that extra second or two where you're waiting for that crippling blow, it really does come down to that. And this is going to be great. I'm super excited for this. Now let's get into the nerfs. And there's really not much here, but there are some things we have to talk about. First of all, we have Form of Celerity being changed to mana instead of health regen. I think most people would kind of just think this is objectively worse, as fighter mana usually isn't a big deal for us in PvP due to blood fusion and our other regen, and we just don't really dump mana in the same way as range classes do. However, that may be different next patch. One thing we need to keep in mind is that fighter currently is very ability heavy. But next patch, it's going to be even more ability heavy because we're going to have Crippling Blow as a dedicated snare, which is another ability we hit. We're going to have Wallop, which has higher uptime than Crippling Blow, which is another ability we hit. We're going to be more incentivized to do Whirlwind, another ability we hit that we don't really hit that often. So we're going to be doing even more abilities next patch and even less basic attacks, which means that we're going to get less value out of our mana regen, basic attack regen style weapon talent trees and form benefits. So genuinely, mana could be a little bit of an issue next patch. We're just going to have to see how it plays, but we're going to absolutely be using more mana and doing more abilities, which is kind of crazy because the fighter's already ability heavy, which I love. And finally, we have reached the big nerf, and that is going to be how much more momentum we're going to be spending next patch. Next patch, we're going to be doing a ton of Wallops, and Wallops take 40% of our maximum momentum. This means that the days of Omega Giga level Berserks are over. Right now, in the current game, you pretty much just get your momentum to max, and you pop a Berserk, and you just blow somebody up with cooldown resets, and every time you Berserk, you pretty much reset all your core cooldowns. That is going to be a lot less of a thing next patch because we're going to be spending so much momentum on these Wallop knockdowns, and we're going to be wanting that Wallop healing that I think that you're going to have to really plan out these big boy Berserks. And honestly, I just don't think we're really going to do it. I think the days of Omega Giga level Berserks that we're doing right now, where we just, unload 2 full sets of cooldowns on somebody, I think that's going to be dampened quite a bit just because it's going to be pretty difficult to get that momentum when you're going to be really wanting to hit those Wallop knockdowns, and spending 40% of your momentum constantly over and over again. It's going to be tough to build past that. So, that's the big nerf, guys, is that Berserk is still going to be super good, by the way. It's still going to be great for the cooldown resets on the micro cooldown resets. You don't need Berserk to reset, a full 30-second, 20-second cooldown for it to be good. Even it resetting a lethal blow on a 10-second cooldown, doing like a double lethal blow, double maim, like it's still going to be crazy for the cooldown resets. But the full salvo, even like what I do is I'll even blow Blitz and then Berserk and then Blitz again. Like, it's crazy right now what you do with Berserk. Those days are over. So yeah, we got some crazy changes coming to the fighter next patch. There are some unknown variables right now. Does Berserk still break crowd control, or is that being removed? Does Battle Cry still apply Riled and Weakened, or is that being removed? And the big one, the thing I really want to know the answer to, and I know they haven't alluded to this at all, they are making changes to the cooldowns of the stances, but are the stances on global cooldown? Is there an animation penalty for changing stances? The reason I ask this is because I swear they just watched my video, and that was my number one suggestion to Fighter, is to remove the 0.7 second animation time on changing stances and have it function like Blood Fusion, where you can weave it into your combos and weave it into your abilities without interrupting your ability. This is a change I would love to see, not only for gameplay reasons and it just being smooth and fluid, but because it would add an insane level of potential skill expression to the class. And I would love to just have this, fluid stance dancer kind of play style where you can really, really squeeze a lot out of this class. And just, if this was in the game, the top level fighters would be doing some crazy stuff, and I would love to see it. And they've sort of hinted that they're kind of going this direction, but they haven't said in the patch notes that this has been removed. Maybe I'm just coping and just really wishing it's removed. But if this is removed and we're able to change stances and it functions like Blood Fusion or functions like the tank stances do, we got a whole new video coming on just that specifically. So, very, very excited for this patch. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. I will say, guys, if you're worried about fighters being overpowered in the immediate future, I don't think it's going to happen. I think that, in general, people are going to interact with fighters in a similar way as they do this patch. A fighter is going to get to you. They're going to knock you down. and they're going to do damage to you. That's going to happen basically in the same way next patch. And to all the fighters out there, guys, don't get too excited. The class probably, in the context of the current game, with the stat scaling and the TTK being the way it is, the class is probably going to be worse next patch despite these buffs. I know that sounds insane to say, but it's probably going to be the case, especially at high gear levels. However, if they slow down the time to kill and we exit Clown World, the fighter is going to be a monster in a game that has a longer TTK with this toolkit. I am so pumped to play this new kit in a more reasonable, sane PvP environment.